In this lecture, we're going to talk about chromosomes and karyotypes. You should recall that homologous chromosomes are two separate chromosomes that contain genes for the same characteristics, but they are not identical. That's extremely important to remember. And that's because each one of them comes from a different parent. So you might have, in your homologous pair, you can have a chromosome from your mom and then a chromosome from your dad. And then the same thing happens with all the other pairs. A chromosome from your mom, a chromosome from your dad. And if you look at the sex chromosomes, if you are a male, you got the X chromosome from your mom and you got the Y chromosome from your dad. And if you're a female, you got an X chromosome from both parents. Because remember, males can pass on an X or a Y chromosome, and females can only pass on an X chromosome. Remember also that your body contains two major types of cells. You have somatic cells. Those are the body cells. They are diploid, which means they have two kinds of each chromosome, or two sets. So your chromosomes are in pairs, which means that you have 46 chromosomes in each human cell. That could also be expressed as 23 pairs of chromosomes. The other major cell type that human bodies contain are called gametes, and those are sex cells. So males have sperm cells and females have egg cells, and they are what's known as haploid. So they have one kind of each chromosome, which means they have a total of 23 chromosomes, and that's it in a gamete or a sex cell. A zygote is a fertilized egg, and a fertilized egg comes from a sperm cell that has 23 chromosomes and an egg cell that has 23 chromosomes. And when those two cells fuse together, you get a zygote. That's this cell, and it has now 46 chromosomes again. So it went from being haploid, or 1N, to being diploid, or 2N. When you look at a karyotype, if you remember, that's these pictures of chromosomes, they contain two different major types of chromosomes. The autosomes are the first 22 pairs of chromosomes, and you can see that each of these pairs of chromosomes are numbered. And so that's how we know which pair is which, and they're always put in the same order in a karyotype. And then the 23rd pair of the chromosomes are the sex chromosomes. A male will have X and Y as their sex chromosomes, and you can tell that it's an X and a Y because they're different sizes. The X chromosome is a lot bigger than the Y chromosome. And then if you have a female, you have the chromosomes XX. And so males inherit their X chromosome from their mother and their Y chromosome from their father, and females inherit their X chromosomes, one from mom and one from dad. Sometimes when chromosomes are dividing during anaphase, they do not divide properly, and that process is called non-disjunction. And it can cause a few different issues. It can cause something called monoploidy, triploidy, monosomy, or trisomy, and we'll talk about what each of those things means on the next few slides. The first case we'll talk about is called monoploidy, and this is when a cell that is supposed to be diploid has had a chromosome division problem. And so now there's only one set of chromosomes in a diploid cell, and that is fatal to the cell. Diploid cells are supposed to have 46 chromosomes in humans, and if you have a monoploidy cell, like a somatic cell that's monoploidy and it only has 23 chromosomes, that cell will simply not survive. Triploidy is when you have 3 sets of chromosomes in a cell that's supposed to be diploid. And so this means that instead of having 46 chromosomes, if a human cell were to be triploidy, you've got 46 chromosomes in a normal cell. 23 would be an extra set, so you'd have 69 chromosomes in a triploidy cell in humans. In human cells, triploidy cells usually cannot survive. It's a fatal condition. However, it is not always fatal in plants, so you will oftentimes find some plant cells that are triploidy and have an extra set of chromosomes. There's another condition called monosomy, which is when you have one pair of chromosomes that is missing a chromosome. This is often fatal, but it is common in one particular disorder that humans can get. It's called Turner syndrome, and it's when a female is missing an X chromosome. So instead of having 2 X chromosomes, she only has 1 X chromosome. The last chromosomal disorder that's typically caused by non-disjunction that we're going to talk about is called trisomy, and this is when you have 3 of a particular kind of chromosome. So instead of having a pair of chromosomes, for example, you have 3 copies of one kind of chromosome. A common example of this is called Down syndrome. And Down syndrome happens when you have an extra copy of the 21st chromosome. And so somebody with Down syndrome, which is also called trisomy 21, has 3 copies of chromosome 21 instead of 2 copies of chromosome 21, which is what you would find in a typical human cell. So now that we know what some of the chromosome disorders are, the way that they're often diagnosed is by making something called a karyotype. So a karyotype is a picture of chromosomes, and it can be used to detect disorders and also just to see what chromosomes looks like. So this is a karyotype, and you can see that there's many pairs. If you were to count them all, you would notice that there's 23 pairs of chromosomes. The last pair of chromosomes are referred to as the sex chromosomes. That's where you'll find the X and the Y. Like we just talked about, Down syndrome is a disorder where you have an extra copy of chromosome 21 because it's called trisomy 21. And so if you look at the 21st pair, which is here, there's 3 copies instead of 2 copies, and that's how you know that someone has Down syndrome. The next karyotype we're going to look at has an error, so see if you can spot it. There's one of those chromosomes that has an extra chromosome instead of having just 2. And if you keep looking, you'll notice if you get all the way to the 23rd pair, or the sex chromosomes, you'll notice there's 3 sex chromosomes instead of 2. 2 of them are X chromosomes, and 1 of them is a Y chromosome. So this particular karyotype has XXY for sex chromosomes. And this is a disorder called Klinefelter syndrome. Klinefelter syndrome results in a male, but they're usually sterile, meaning they cannot have children, and they're usually tall and long-limbed, and then they sometimes have some cognitive delays. In this karyotype, you should notice also that there is an error. So you'll notice that the sex chromosomes, there is only 1, there's not 2, and there's only 1 X chromosome. So this is a female who has Turner syndrome. In Turner syndrome, they are missing an X chromosome, which is expressed as XO or X0, and they result in short, sterile females, so they usually can't have kids. There have been instances also where you find males who have an X and 2 Y chromosomes. They haven't seemed to find too many side effects from having an extra Y chromosome. They usually might be a little bit tall, but they're normal and they're fertile, which means they can have children. They might have heightened aggression if they happen to have elevated testosterone levels. Chromosomes can also experience mutations. So they can include things like deletions, which is when part of the chromosome is missing, a duplication, where a part of the chromosome gets copied multiple times, an inversion, where it's backwards, or translocation, where it breaks off and attaches to a different part of a chromosome. So here you can see there's a deletion. So if you were to if these 2 parts of the gene were to be removed, you'd end up with a sequence that looks like this, and that would be a deletion because part of the message is missing. A duplication occurs if you've got part of a chromosome that breaks off, so it's deleted from one area and then it's added to a new area, and so then that can become a duplication or deletion. An inversion is when the sequence goes the wrong direction. So here it's CDE, and here you can see it's EDC. So it got inverted or flipped backwards. And then there's something called reciprocal translocation. So translocation is when part of the chromosome breaks off and trades places with a different part of a chromosome. So you can see that some of these letters have switched sides or switched chromosomes, and so now they're in a new location.